There is a window of time that opens every single night, right before you fall asleep, and almost everyone on this planet wastes it. You lie there, scrolling, worrying, replaying the day, and you have no idea that your brain has just unlocked a door that most people never even notice exists. José Silva spent decades studying that exact window, and what he discovered is so simple that the first time you hear it, you will wonder why nobody ever taught it to you in school. Because in the minutes before sleep, your mind slips into a state where it stops arguing with you, it stops filtering, it stops resisting, and whatever you plant there does not just fade away with the night. It takes root. If you have ever tried to change a habit through sheer willpower and failed within a week, this is not because you lack discipline. It is because you have been fighting the wrong part of your brain. Willpower lives in the part of you that is wide awake, busy, analytical, exhausted by 5 in the afternoon. But the part of you that actually runs your habits, your fears, your self-image, your automatic reactions, that part barely listens to willpower at all. It listens to something else. And José Silva figured out exactly how to speak its language using nothing more than the last few minutes before you drift off night after night. By the end of this video, you will understand precisely what he discovered, why it worked for ordinary people with no special training, and how you can do the exact same thing tonight in your own bed without any equipment, without any app, without paying a single cent. But before we get into the technique itself, we need to understand the problem it solves, because if you skip this part, you will use the method wrong. The way almost everyone who has heard fragments of it online has been using it wrong for years. Here is the problem. Your brain runs on different electrical frequencies depending on how alert you are. When you are wide awake, arguing with a coworker, cramming for an exam, or scrolling through your phone in a panic, your brain is producing fast waves called beta waves. In this state, your conscious, critical mind is in full control. It questions everything. It says, that will never work. You are not disciplined enough. You have tried this before and failed. Who do you think you are? This is useful when you need to solve a math problem or drive through traffic. It is absolutely terrible when you are trying to convince your own mind that you deserve success, that you are capable, that you are worthy of the life you want. The critical mind slams the door before the new belief even gets a chance to walk in. But there is another state, slower, quieter, and Silva became obsessed with it. It is called the alpha state. It is the same state you drift through for a few minutes right as you are falling asleep, and again for a few minutes right as you are waking up. In alpha, the loud, argumentative, skeptical voice in your head goes quiet. The gatekeeper steps back, and in that gap, information does not get interrogated the way it does during the day. It gets absorbed. This is not some mystical claim invented to sell books. It reflects something researchers have observed for decades. The mind's suggestibility changes with its state of arousal, and the drowsy transition into sleep is one of the most receptive states most people experience on a daily basis, whether they realize it or not. So here is the real question that changes everything. If your mind is more open to suggestion right before sleep, what have you been feeding it during that window your entire life? Think honestly about your own last week. What were you thinking about as you closed your eyes? For most people, it is not calm, empowering, deliberate thoughts. It is anxiety about tomorrow's meeting. It is replaying an argument. It is doom-scrolling the news. It is worrying about money, about health, about whether people like you. Every single night, without knowing it, most people are using the most receptive window of their entire day to rehearse fear. And that is the real secret hiding underneath everything Silva taught. It was never really about relaxation techniques for their own sake. It was about recognizing that this window exists whether you use it or not, and deciding for the first time in your life to use it on purpose. Stay with me, because in a few minutes we are going to walk through the exact sequence Silva used, step by step, in the order he actually used it, not the watered-down version that gets repeated in 3-minute videos online. We are also going to talk about why this method quietly became one of the most influential frameworks behind modern visualization techniques used by athletes, entrepreneurs, and performers, decades before those words became trendy on social media. But first, if this is the kind of channel that helps you understand how your own mind actually works, and not just recycled advice you have already heard 100 times, this is a good moment to subscribe, because there is a part of this story coming up in a few minutes about what Silva discovered almost by accident while working with something completely unrelated to self-improvement that most people have never heard, and it changes how you should think about every single night of sleep for the rest of your life. Let's go back to the beginning, because understanding where this came from matters more than most people realize. José Silva was not a doctor. He was not a psychologist with a university position and a research grant. He was a self-taught electronics repairman in Texas, working with radios in the 1940s, a man who had left school early to support his family and who taught himself through correspondence courses at night. He became fascinated, almost accidentally, with the idea that if radios could pick up signals more clearly when they were tuned to the right frequency, maybe the human brain worked the same way. That single idea, applied first out of curiosity to his own children's schoolwork, eventually grew into decades of research involving what he estimated to be thousands of hours of observation, long before anyone called what he was doing a method with a name. He began by simply paying attention to what happened to his own children right before they fell asleep. He would sit with them, talk quietly, and repeat calm, encouraging statements while they were still awake but drowsy. And he started noticing something that seemed too simple to matter. Their grades improved. Their confidence changed. They handled stress differently. He was not doing anything dramatic. He was talking to them during the exact window we just described, the alpha window, when their critical, skeptical, tired 8-year-old brain had already stepped aside for the night. This is the part that most people skip when they talk about Silva, and it is the part that actually explains why the technique works. He did not discover some supernatural shortcut. He discovered a natural, biological property of the human brain that had simply gone unused because nobody had ever pointed it out clearly enough for ordinary people to apply it deliberately. Now let's get into exactly what he taught people to do, because this is where it becomes something you can actually use tonight. The first part of the technique is what Silva called entering a level. Before you say anything to your own mind, you have to get your body and your brain into that slower, drowsy alpha state on purpose rather than waiting for it to happen accidentally as you fall asleep. Here is how that actually looks in practice. You lie down in bed, in the dark, in the position you normally sleep in. You are not trying to fall asleep yet. You are trying to relax completely, on purpose, layer by layer. Silva taught a very specific, almost mechanical process for this, because he believed vague instructions like just relax do not work. The mind needs something concrete to follow. You start by taking a few slow breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth, longer on the exhale than the inhale, because a longer exhale is one of the fastest physical signals you can send your nervous system that it is safe to slow down. Then you begin relaxing your body from the top of your head downward. Your forehead, your eyes, your jaw, which most people hold tighter than they realize all day long, your shoulders, dropping them away from your ears, your arms, heavy against the bed, your chest, slowing with each breath, your stomach, your hips, your legs, all the way down to your feet until your entire body feels like it is sinking slightly into the mattress. While you are doing this physical relaxation, Silva added something that most relaxation techniques from that era did not include, which is a mental counting method. As you relax each part of your body, you silently count backward, slowly, from a number like 50 or 25 for a shorter version. Not fast, not like reciting a list, but slow, spaced out, almost lazy counting, matching the pace of your own breathing. This counting does two things at once. It gives your busy, analytical mind something small and repetitive to focus on, which is important because a wandering mind at this stage will drift right back into worrying about tomorrow's problems. And it acts as an anchor, something your brain starts to associate night after night with the transition into that slower, drowsier state. After enough repetition, simply beginning that countdown becomes a trigger. Your mind starts sliding toward alpha faster and faster, the same way a familiar smell can instantly transport you back to a childhood memory because the association has been built through repetition. By the time you reach the lower numbers, you should feel noticeably heavier, slower, your thoughts more spaced out, less urgent. This is the state Silva wanted you in before the second part of the technique, because everything before this point was really just preparation. The actual reprogramming happens in what comes next. This is where most people who have only heard bits and pieces of Silva's work online get it completely wrong. They think the method is just relax and think positive thoughts. It is not. The specific way you speak to yourself in this state matters enormously, and Silva was extremely precise about it. The first rule is that everything must be stated as if it is already true, in the present tense, never as a future wish. Your mind in this drowsy state does not process the difference between imagination and memory very well, which is exactly why nightmares feel so real even though nothing in them actually happened. Silva realized this cuts both ways. If you say to yourself, I hope I will be more confident someday, your mind treats confidence as something distant, something that belongs to a future version of you that never quite arrives. But if you say, I am calm, I am capable, I handle challenges with a clear mind, stated simply as fact, your mind has no future to push it into. It has to process it as something already happening right now inside you. The second rule is repetition without emotional force. This surprises people because most self-improvement advice today tells you to feel it intensely, to shout your affirmations, to work yourself into an emotional state. Silva taught almost the opposite for this specific pre-sleep window. You are not trying to hype yourself up. You are speaking calmly, almost matter-of-factly, the way you would state your own name or the city you live in. Quiet, steady, certain. Because certainty, not excitement, is what a relaxed mind absorbs most easily. Excitement can actually pull you back toward beta, back toward that alert, questioning state you were trying to leave behind. The third rule, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, is specificity connected to real behavior, not vague hopes. Saying I am successful means almost nothing to your mind because it has no image, no scene, nothing to grab onto. Silva taught people to pair their statements with a brief, simple mental picture. If you are working on confidence before an important conversation tomorrow, you do not just say, I am confident. You picture yourself, briefly, walking into that room, shoulders relaxed, voice steady, saying what you need to say. You do not need to hold this image for long. A few seconds is enough, because in this drowsy state, a few seconds of a clear, calm mental image can plant itself far more deeply than minutes of your usual daytime effort. Let's pause here for a moment because there is a detail from Silva's own history that most people have never heard, and it changes how seriously you should take everything we've just described. Silva did not build this method purely from theory. He built it while watching, for over 10 years, what actually happened to real people night after night as they tried different versions of this process. He kept records. He adjusted the wording. He noticed which phrasing worked and which did not, the same patient trial and error approach he had learned fixing radios as a young man, except now the machine he was tuning was the human mind itself. What started as a father trying to help his own children with their grades eventually became something people around the world sought him out for because the results were consistent enough that word spread on their own without him ever positioning himself as some kind of guru with a dramatic origin story. He was, by most accounts, a quiet, methodical man who simply kept refining something until it reliably worked. And here is the detail that connects directly back to what we're doing tonight. He noticed something curious. The people who saw the fastest, most noticeable changes were never the ones who used the technique occasionally, whenever they remembered, whenever they felt like it. They were the ones who did it the same way every single night as a fixed part of their routine, the same way you might brush your teeth without even thinking about it anymore. Consistency mattered more than intensity. A calm, quiet 2 minutes every night for a month outperformed one dramatic, emotional 20-minute session done once and never repeated. This is the part where most people give up on techniques like this because 2 minutes a night for 30 days sounds unimpressive compared to the promise of an instant transformation. But your brain does not build new automatic patterns instantly. It builds them the same way it builds any other habit, through repetition, through consistent, low-friction exposure, night after night, until the new pattern becomes as automatic as the old one used to be. Let's talk now about what you actually say, because the words matter, but so does choosing the right target. Silva did not believe in vague, generic affirmations. He believed you should choose one specific area of your life to work on at a time, rather than trying to reprogram everything at once. Your mind, even in that relaxed state, has limited bandwidth. Trying to fix your confidence, your finances, your relationships, and your health all in the same 2-minute session dilutes everything into vague noise. Choose one, just one, for at least a few weeks before adding another. If your goal is confidence, your statements might sound like this. I speak clearly and calmly in front of others. My ideas have value, and I share them without hesitation. I trust myself in situations I used to avoid. Paired briefly with a picture of yourself in a specific real situation you are actually facing this week, not some abstract imaginary triumph, but something real, something coming up on your actual calendar. If your goal is releasing anxiety, your statements shift slightly because you are not fighting the anxious thought directly, which tends to give it more attention, not less. Instead, you are replacing it. My mind is calm and clear. I handle whatever tomorrow brings, one step at a time. I release what I cannot control tonight, and I rest. Notice these are not aggressive denials of the anxiety. They are calm redirections spoken the way you would state a simple fact. If your goal is health-related habits, the wording again stays present tense and specific. I choose foods that make me feel strong. I enjoy moving my body. I wake up with energy, paired with a brief image of yourself actually doing that thing tomorrow morning specifically, not some distant future version of yourself. Now, here is something Silva discovered that still surprises people today, and it is the part of his work that quietly influenced far more of modern psychology and performance coaching than most people realize, even though his name rarely gets credited in mainstream conversations about it. He found that this pre-sleep window was not only useful for changing beliefs about yourself, it was remarkably effective for rehearsing skills, for what we would now call mental rehearsal or visualization, decades before elite athletes and Olympic coaches started publicly talking about visualization as a serious training tool. If someone had an important presentation, a difficult conversation, a physical performance, a competition, Silva taught them to use that same drowsy window to mentally walk through it calmly, in detail, seeing themselves handle it well from start to finish. Not because thinking about something makes it magically happen without effort, but because the brain does not fully distinguish between a vividly imagined, repeated action and a physically rehearsed one when it comes to building familiarity and reducing fear. By the time the real moment arrived, it did not feel like the first time. It felt, in a strange but very real way, like the 10th time, because the mind had already walked through it calmly again and again in that quiet window before sleep. This single insight, applied outside the world of pure self-improvement, became one of the foundations for mental rehearsal practices later adopted across sports psychology, performance coaching, and even how some surgeons and pilots prepare for high-stakes situations today. Not because Silva invented visualization from nothing. Humans have imagined future scenarios forever, but because he was among the first to systematize exactly when to do it and how to structure it so it actually changed behavior rather than remaining a vague, occasional daydream. Before we get to the exact nightly sequence, there's something else worth understanding, because it explains why this particular window works so much better than trying to change your mind during the day, And why so many people who try positive thinking during their morning coffee or in front of a bathroom mirror quietly give up after a week or two, convinced that none of this works for them. During the day, your mind is being pulled in a dozen directions at once. You are managing traffic, deadlines, other people's moods, notifications buzzing in your pocket, 100 small decisions before lunch even arrives. In that state, trying to insert a new belief about yourself is like trying to write a message in wet sand while the tide keeps rolling in. The words barely form before the next wave of stimulation washes them away. This is why so many people can recite a positive affirmation in the mirror every morning for months and still feel exactly the same underneath. The words never had a quiet enough moment to actually settle. Nighttime, right before sleep, is different because the tide has gone out, there are no notifications, there's no traffic, nobody needs a decision from you in the next 10 seconds. Your conscious mind, the same one that spent all day defending your old beliefs, like a tired security guard at the end of a long shift, finally starts to loosen its grip. That is not a coincidence, and it is not something you have to force. It is simply biology cooperating with you if you know how to use it, instead of sleeping right past it the way most people do. Now let's talk about something Silva encountered constantly throughout his years of teaching this method, something you have almost certainly felt yourself the very first time you try something like this: skepticism. Not from other people necessarily, but from inside your own head. You lie there, you say a calm, confident phrase about yourself, and immediately some part of your mind fires back. That's not true. You know that's not true. Remember last time you tried and failed. This inner pushback is normal, and Silva addressed it directly rather than pretending it does not happen. He taught that you should not argue with that skeptical voice, because arguing with it keeps you locked in exactly the alert, analytical beta state you were trying to leave behind. Instead, you simply acknowledge it without engaging, the way you might notice a car passing outside your window without turning to watch it drive away, and you gently return to your breath, your countdown, your calm statement. Over several nights, that skeptical voice naturally grows quieter, not because you defeated it in an argument, but because you stopped feeding it attention every single night. This matters because so many people quit after their very first attempt, convinced the technique failed simply because their mind pushed back on night one. Silva was clear about this in his teaching. The first few nights are rarely dramatic. You are not trying to win a debate with your own skepticism in one sitting. You are planting something small, night after night, the same way a single day of watering a seed does nothing visible, yet skipping it entirely guarantees nothing ever grows at all. Let's go back to the practical side for a moment, because there is a common mistake people make once they learn the basic sequence, and it quietly ruins the entire process for them. They rush. They lie down, they say their phrases within the first 30 seconds, still fully alert, still thinking about their inbox, and then they wonder why nothing seems to change after a week. The relaxation and the countdown are not a formality to get through quickly so you can reach the good part. They are the actual mechanism that makes the good part work at all. Without genuinely slowing down first, your calm statements are just words spoken to a wide-awake, skeptical mind, the exact same mind that already dismissed those same ideas 100 times before during the day. This is why Silva emphasized patience with the process itself, not just patience waiting for results. Some nights the relaxation will happen quickly, within a minute or two. Other nights, especially after a stressful day, it may take longer for your body to actually let go of tension you were not even consciously aware you were holding. Both are completely normal. The goal is never to rush toward the phrases. The goal is to actually arrive at that heavier, slower, quieter state first, however long that genuinely takes on a given night, and only then to speak. There is another detail worth mentioning, because it explains why so many people who try meditation apps or generic relaxation recordings feel like something is missing compared to this specific method. Most relaxation content stops exactly where Silva's method begins. It calms you down, plays some ambient music, tells you to relax, and then simply ends, leaving you drifting off with nothing specific planted at all. That is genuinely useful for reducing stress in the moment, and there is nothing wrong with it. But it misses the second half of the opportunity entirely. Relaxation alone is like plowing a field and then walking away without planting a single seed. The soil is ready, the conditions are perfect, and nothing is done with it. Silva's contribution was never really the relaxation itself. Other people had been teaching relaxation techniques for a long time before him. His contribution was recognizing that once you reach that fertile, receptive state, you should actually use it for something specific, deliberate, and repeated, rather than simply enjoying the calm and letting the moment pass unused. Let's talk about time, because this is usually the very first objection people raise the moment they hear about this. I don't have time for another routine before bed. Here is the honest answer to that. The entire sequence, done properly, without rushing, takes somewhere between 3 and 8 minutes. Most of that time is simply the relaxation and countdown which your body needs regardless, since you would otherwise spend those same minutes lying in bed anyway, usually scrolling, worrying, or staring at the ceiling, replaying your day. You are not adding new time to your night. You are replacing minutes you already spent lying there unproductively with minutes spent deliberately, on purpose, working in your own favor instead of quietly working against yourself the way most nightly scrolling and worrying actually does. Now, let's address something that separates people who see real change from people who try this for 3 nights and quietly abandon it, because this next part might be the single most important piece of the entire method, more important in some ways than the exact wording of your phrases. Silva observed, across years of working with people, that emotional charge attached to a belief mattered enormously, but not in the way most self-improvement content assumes today. Modern advice often tells you to feel intense excitement, almost forcing enthusiasm into every affirmation, shouting it, feeling it explosively. Silva's approach, specifically for this pre-sleep window, was calmer and, in a strange way, more powerful precisely because of that calmness. He taught that certainty, quiet, settled, almost boring certainty, sinks in more effectively during this drowsy state than excitement does, because excitement is an alerting emotion. It activates you. It can nudge your brain right back toward that faster, more alert wavelength you are trying to leave behind for the night. Calm certainty, on the other hand, matches the state you are already in. It does not fight the drowsiness, it moves with it. Think about the difference between someone shouting, "I'm going to be rich" at the top of their lungs, full of forced, performative energy, compared to someone quietly, calmly saying, in the dark, half asleep, "I am someone who makes good decisions with money." The second version sounds almost unremarkable, and that is exactly the point. Your mind does not interrogate unremarkable, quiet statements of fact nearly as hard as it interrogates loud, dramatic declarations that sound like they are trying too hard to convince someone, including yourself. This is worth repeating because it contradicts so much of what circulates online today. Loud, forced positivity is not what makes this technique work. Quiet, repeated, matter-of-fact certainty is what makes it work. If you find yourself getting emotionally worked up while saying your phrases at night, almost performing them, that is usually a sign you have drifted back toward that alert, effortful daytime state, and it is worth gently returning to your breath and your countdown before continuing. Let's talk about one more piece of this that Silva was especially precise about, because it is easy to get subtly wrong even once you understand everything else. The mental image you pair with your statement should never be a distant, dreamlike fantasy version of your future self, unrecognizable, disconnected from your actual life. It works far better when it is a specific, plausible, near-term scene, something that could genuinely happen tomorrow, next week, or next month, involving people, places, and situations you actually recognize from your own life. If your goal involves confidence at work, picture your actual desk, your actual coworkers, the actual meeting on your actual calendar this week. If your goal involves calm around a specific relationship, picture the specific person, the specific kind of conversation you tend to have with them, handled the way you wish it usually went. The nearer and more specific the scene, the more directly it seems to influence how you actually show up when that real moment eventually arrives, because your mind is not being asked to imagine some abstract, disconnected future. It is being shown a preview of tomorrow, one it has already quietly rehearsed. Let's bring this back to something practical, because understanding the history is interesting, but using it tonight is what actually matters. Here is the full sequence laid out simply the way you would actually do it tonight. You lie down in the dark in your normal sleeping position. You take a few slow breaths, longer exhale than inhale. You relax your body deliberately from your head down to your feet, noticing tension and releasing it as you go. You begin a slow, silent countdown from around 25, matching the pace of your breathing, feeling yourself grow heavier and slower with each number. Once you feel that familiar, drowsy, almost sinking sensation, you gently bring to mind the one area you have chosen to work on, whether that is confidence, calm, health, or a specific upcoming moment you want to handle well. You state your chosen phrases quietly in your mind, present tense, calm, unhurried, no forced emotion, just simple certainty. You pair them briefly with a short, clear mental picture of yourself already living that reality. And then, without forcing anything further, you simply let yourself drift into sleep the way you normally would, letting whatever you just planted settle in undisturbed. That is the entire technique. No incense, no special app, no expensive course, no equipment of any kind. Just breath, relaxation, a slow count, calm words, and a brief picture. Repeated tonight, and again tomorrow night, and again the night after that. But there is something important we have to address before we finish, something Silva himself was very direct about, because without it, people misuse this technique and then wrongly conclude that it does not work. This method was never presented as a replacement for action during your waking hours. It does not mean you can lie in bed each night, whisper a few calm phrases about your finances, and expect money to appear without ever sending an application, having a difficult conversation, or doing the actual work required. What it does is remove a hidden weight that has been quietly working against you this entire time. The automatic subconscious belief that says you are not ready. This always goes wrong for people like you. Once that quiet resistance starts to soften, your daytime actions, the emails you send, the conversations you have, the opportunities you actually take instead of talking yourself out of, start becoming easier, more consistent, less exhausting, because you are no longer fighting your own mind every single step of the way just to do the things you already know you should be doing anyway. Let's talk about what actually happens over the following weeks, because the timeline matters, and setting the wrong expectation is one of the fastest ways people abandon something that was genuinely starting to work. In the first few nights, most people notice almost nothing dramatic, and that is completely expected. What tends to happen first is subtle. You might simply fall asleep a little faster because you have given your restless mind something calm and structured to focus on instead of the usual loop of worry. That alone, for many people, is worth the few minutes it takes, since a faster, calmer transition into sleep improves the quality of the rest you get that night, which quietly affects your mood and focus the following day, even before any deeper change has taken hold. By the second week, people typically start noticing small shifts during waking hours that feel slightly disconnected from any obvious cause. A conversation you would normally have avoided suddenly feels manageable, and you walk into it before you even consciously decide to be braver about it. A craving you would normally give into without thinking gets paused for a moment, just long enough for you to actually choose, rather than react automatically the way you always used to. These moments are easy to dismiss as coincidence, and in isolation, maybe they are. But people who keep a simple record, even a short note on their phone each day, start to notice that these small shifts are not random. They cluster around exactly the area they have been quietly working on each night. By the third or fourth week, for most people who have stayed consistent, something more noticeable tends to happen. The new belief starts feeling less like something you are repeating to yourself and more like something you simply accept as true without needing to convince yourself of it anymore. This is the actual sign the method is working, not a lightning bolt moment of transformation, but the quiet erosion of the old belief replaced gradually by the new one until one day you realize you're not needed to remind yourself of it for several nights because it no longer feels like something you are working toward. It feels like something you already are. This gradual timeline explains why so many people who try this for 3 or 4 nights, expecting some dramatic shift, conclude that it does not work, when in reality they simply stopped watering the seed before it had any real chance to grow. Silva was direct about this in his own teaching, telling people plainly that this was not a trick or a shortcut around effort, but a different kind of effort, quieter, smaller, and sustained over time. The same way, physical strength does not appear after one visit to the gym, but reliably appears after enough consistent visits, spaced out, repeated, without needing each individual session to feel remarkable on its own. Now, it would be dishonest to present all of this without addressing the obvious question that skeptical viewers are likely asking right now. Is there real evidence behind any of this, or is it simply a comforting story that feels true because we want it to be true? This is a fair question, and it deserves an honest answer rather than a dismissive one in either direction. The broader scientific understanding of suggestibility during drowsy, transitional states between wakefulness and sleep is genuinely well established, and researchers have studied altered states of consciousness, relaxation, and their effects on stress and behavior for a long time. The specific claims Silva made about his own method were often based on his personal observations and the testimonials of people he worked with directly, rather than the kind of large-scale, controlled, peer-reviewed studies that modern researchers would require before calling something definitively proven. That distinction matters, and being upfront about it matters too. What we can say with confidence is that the underlying mechanism Silva was working with, relaxation, reducing resistance to new ideas, the power of repeated present tense self-talk, and the documented usefulness of mental rehearsal for performance, are each independently supported by decades of broader research in psychology, even in cases where Silva's own specific framework and terminology have not been the direct subject of that research. In other words, you do not need to believe in anything mystical or unproven to try this tonight. You are simply combining three ingredients that independently already have reasonable support behind them: relaxation, present tense self-talk, and brief mental rehearsal. Applied specifically during the drowsy window, most people already pass through every single night without using it for anything at all. Whether or not you call that a discovery unique to José Silva, or simply a practical repackaging of ideas that existed in different forms before him, the actual experience of trying it tonight costs you nothing but a few minutes you were already going to spend lying in the dark anyway. There is one more layer to this worth mentioning, because it extends the method slightly beyond just the nighttime window, and Silva himself taught this as a natural companion practice rather than a separate technique entirely. The same drowsy alpha state that exists right before you fall asleep also exists briefly right as you wake up, before your mind fully boots into the busy, alert, beta state of a normal day. Most people destroy this window instantly, reaching for their phone the second their eyes open, flooding their still half-asleep mind with notifications, messages, and other people's opinions before they have had a single unhurried thought of their own. Silva taught people to protect this morning window the same way they protect the nighttime one, even if only for 60 to 90 seconds, lying still, eyes closed, calmly repeating the same phrase or two they used the night before, reinforcing it one more time before the noise of the day begins. This single habit, protecting just the first minute of your morning the same way you protect the last few minutes of your night, doubles your daily exposure to the new belief you're building, using windows that already exist in your day, regardless of what you do with them. Let's return one final time to the practical mechanics, because by now you understand not just what to do, but why each piece of it actually matters, which is the part almost every simplified version of this online completely leaves out. That is really the entire secret hiding behind decades of research, thousands of documented cases, and a method that continues to influence how modern coaches, therapists, and performance psychologists talk about the power of belief. Even when they have never heard the name José Silva, it was never about magic. It was about noticing a natural window your own brain opens every single night and choosing, finally, to walk through it on purpose instead of leaving it to chance the way almost everyone else does every night, without ever realizing what they were missing. Tonight, when you lie down, you now know something most people never learn in their entire lives. You know exactly what that drowsy window right before sleep actually is, why your mind becomes so receptive there, and precisely how to use it, in your own words, for the specific part of your life you are ready to change. You do not need to remember everything perfectly the first time. Even an imperfect attempt tonight, a few slow breaths, a loose countdown, one calm phrase repeated quietly, plants something that was not there before. If this changed how you think about the minutes before you fall asleep tonight, imagine what else you will find explored on this channel, because this is exactly what we do here. Taking ideas that sound simple on the surface and showing you the real mechanics underneath them, the parts almost nobody else explains clearly. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And tonight, when you turn off the light, do not waste that window the way you always have. Use it on purpose for the very first time.